This video is going to talk about layer options, blending modes, and marbling isolation. So if I jump into our image, so now with our image, what you're going to see here is I've got two layers. So this one over the top, so if I double click on this top layer, I'll end up with this, the layer options. And what you're going to notice is that there's two sliders down the bottom. One says this layer and then the underlying layer. So this is talking about the dark colors and the light. So with this image on top, if I pull the dark slider in, the image underneath is going to come through in the darkest areas first. So it'll come through in the dark colors of the rocks. And so you can see the boat from the image underneath. So it's letting the image come through in the areas from black all the way through to this light grey. Let's move this menu a little bit so you can see a bit more. If I do the same with the white, the image underneath is going to show through in the lightest areas. So the first area it's going to come through is probably going to be these clouds. You can see the grey of the image underneath coming through. So it comes through in all the lightest areas first. Now the other thing, if I enlarge up on this image, it looks really pixelated, and that's because the image comes through, and when it gets to this point here exactly, it cuts off. So it cuts off at a particular pixel. If I hold down the Option key on a Mac or Alt on PC, hold it down and drag on one side of that triangle, I can split it. And so what it's doing now is it softens that response a little bit. Move it down a bit more. So what it's doing is it's saying the image comes through absolutely until it hits here, and then it's like a blend. It softens a little bit so it's not cutting off pixel by pixel. Drag that back. Now the image underneath, and I'll just show you it for a second. Okay, so we've got a lot of grey, white, and this is the boat, and then these dark areas here. So if we double click, on this area again, once we switch the eye on, and this time we'll work with the image underneath. So if I pull this in, the lightest areas of the image underneath are going to come through. So the grey, the white of the boat, and then the grey will start to come through. So there's the grey. So you can see here that the image on top only shows through in the darkest areas, which is kind of the base of that boat. Bring it back here, just the very lightest areas show through. Now the darkest side is going to be probably the shadows in the bottom of the boat. So that, control it so it doesn't let the grey come through. And remember Option or Alt, grab 1/2. That is going to soften that transition a little. You can see the way that it softens it when I move it closer together. Now all of this stuff, and this is where it gets pretty phenomenal, is that we can change the opacities. We can work with just the layers. So now we're working with just the red. So you can control it color-wise rather than doing just the overall image. We've got channels that we can switch on and off. We have blending modes as well, where we can go through lighten, screen, color dodge, all of this with the layer options. So soon it very quickly becomes a quite a complex image. You'll notice there's other things in here, kind of styles, so bevel and emboss, outer glow, inner glow, things like that. But at the moment we're just using this basic layer option, so I'm going to go with that. Okay. So the blending options as well. I mean, this creates quite a nice image. But up here we have normal. If I click on that, and I can just use my arrow key to cycle through them. Dissolve, darken, multiply, where it's just one image over top of the other. Color burn. So it's going through a number of these responses. Lighten, it's doing a kind of an overall. Some of the combinations of the especially when we've got the layer options going, it can get pretty complex. And the best idea is just to use it and try it and to see what ends up working the best. So I'm going to open this up. Just going to push the sliders back so everything's kind of reset back to what it was. I'm going to unlock this layer, and I'm just going to move it up the top. So I'm going to play with this a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a selection, but I'm going to make a selection in a different way. I can see that most of this background is grey, so I'm going to go select. This time I'm going to use something called color range. So what this lets me do is I get a little preview down here is with the eyedropper. If I click on an area, you can actually even click and drag. Click on that. If I use the plus, I can add to that selection, so I'm going to drag across to get rid of that top corner. I can see it starting to affect. So I'm going to go with this at the moment. The fuzziness, if it's up, it's going to select more. If I drag it down, it's going to be a bit cruder in its selection. Add to it a bit. So here you can see I'm kind of getting rid of some of these areas, but I'm still keeping a fair amount of the boat. I'll go OK. I can hit the quick mask icon. It's around the wrong way, so if I want it the other way, I can just click on my mask and go Command I, which is the same as going Image, Adjustments, Invert. And it swaps around. So now I just have the boat, and this. I can see here up in the corner, go to my channels and show you that it's a bit grubby up here. So I don't have to do it in here. It's probably easier to see. If I go back to my layers, as long as I'm on the mask, as long as I know that these colors are pure black and white, and black's in the foreground. Remember black blocks? I can clean up that corner. Obviously, if I want to see it in great detail, I go to my channels, I click on it, switch the eye off beside RGB, and then I can see exactly what's going on and go, okay, I can clear some of these finer details off. And when I'm ready, back on RGB, there's no eye beside the mask, and back to the layers. I actually kind of liked it the other way around, so I'm going to go Command I, and I'm going to start to add a few more things in. So the other image I've got here is the marbling, so I'm going to isolate and play with this. The way I'm going to do this is by using the same selection tool. Select, by colour, and pick the white, control the fuzziness a bit. I'm going to blow this up a wee bit and I'll show you why. I'll go OK. Got my selection. I hit the mask icon. And this time I'm going to go and have a look at the channels. So onto my mask, switch the eye off beside RGB, and I'm going to add a filter on it. This is where things really start to look quite nice with the marbling. If I go back and I'll just put a colour underneath so you can see what it's looking like. Option delete, filled it with the foreground colour, drag it behind. So you can see I've selected the colour and it's the marbling as it is. I can Command I, so it has just the blue. Command I, back to this. Now, what I'm going to do with this one is if I go into my channels, switch the eye off beside RGB, I'm going to put a filter over this. And the filter I like is under the filter gallery, and it's this one in Sketch called Stamp. So I can smooth it right out, make it globular. I can change the darkness or the lightness. So what I'm going to do is, if I take it too far back it looks like a bad photocopy. I'm just going to move it up until it gets rid of some of those little details and blobs it just a wee bit more. When I've got that, I'll go OK. It's changed the mask. Now if I hit RGB, back to my layers, I can see what's happening. Now what I like with this is it still adheres to the design of the marbling. What looks really good is if I switch the lock off between those two, click on the mask and get the arrow tool, I can now move them independent of each other, and you can end up getting some really, really beautiful looking isolation. So I'm going to go with this. I'm on my mask, so the bit I'm not quite so keen on are some of these areas where it's rounded up the top. So with a reasonably tight brush, I'm going to paint it over some of these areas where the edge is kind of squared off, and just round them off a bit, make them a bit more interesting. The square edge can get a little distracting, so I'll just make the brush a little bit smaller, and I might leave that top square edge, just round this off a bit. Okay, so that's got a much nicer feel to it. So this one now, I'm going to grab that layer, drag it over, and bring it down, and drop it on my other image. Command minus, I'm just going to reduce it down, so I can go Command T, and I can just scale this a bit and get it how I want. You can see at the moment that when it's scaling, I hit that and go Command Z, it wasn't working together, and it's because these aren't linked. So I have to make sure they're linked. Command T, so that they're scaling together. Pop that down there. And again, using the techniques that we know that we can get the mask for the ship. And we can use it to isolate. So at the moment it's got the background selected. So let's come in and have a look here. So I'll hit D, so now it's pure black and white. Got my paintbrush tool. And now if I'm up on the mask, start painting, it'll cut off everything in the background, everything except for what's over the boat. And this is where we get to play with it a little bit more. So if I go here, I'll just put caps lock on so I can see where my brush is. So I can rub this out, and it's just going to rub out that background image. Command Shift I is inverse. So now I'm taking out some of the stuff that sits over the boat. I'm rounding this a wee bit and just taking a portion of it off. I'm going to run a line up here, take another bit off. And again, there's a few things here where I can kind of rub it off, but I'll try and keep to that. You can see there the rock line, and if I make this brush a bit smaller, I can and hit X, I can paint it back in and try and stick to that, the edge of the rock a wee bit. Make the brush a bit bigger, and just play with these areas. Command Shift I, and I have it over the rock, but I'm going to erase X, black to block. I'm going to erase it off this background here. Maybe this big bit down here, I can erase that as well, knowing that it's going to stay over the image of the rock. So starting to weave these images into each other. So I'm just going to Command Z. I'm going to take it out of the background. Here a wee bit. Command H. It's just letting me see it a wee bit. Command Shift I. Command H will hide the edges again, and that's just going to let me delete out some of it. I can see it going in there, so I'm going to go X, swap it around and get a smaller brush, and I'm going to get rid of this portion here because I just want this line to come through, but not these verticals. X, swap it around, I can keep painting it in. X to swap it around. So I'm just playing around with white blocks, black blocks, and white shows through. So I can play around with these things a wee bit and kind of mix the images in together. Command Shift H. Command H to see that boat again. And actually I'm going to Command Shift I. So it's got the background selection. I can tell this by the dotty line around the edge of the image. And X to get black as my foreground color because that blocks. And I'm just going to get the bottom of this boat. And I'm just going to curve the marbling a bit. It was too heavy at the bottom for me. I like this a wee bit more where it's kind of starting to come back in. So now we've got the layer options, isolating those two images. Then we've got the marbling kind of intermingling over the top. And then we've got one more image here, which is this graffiti. So like the drawings and stuff that you've been doing. So the same thing we've been doing if I select all. So Command A or Control A on a PC. Command or Control X to cut it in this case. Channels, New Channel. Command V to paste it. Command L to bring in the levels, always up under image adjustments, levels. You'll find this sort of stuff for color correction. I just want to get that grey line out, and I can see with the histogram here, this is kind of showing the dirty bits in the white, the greys. So if I slide that, as soon as it's past that edge of the histogram, I know this is all white. You can see here that it's saying the blacks are not pure black. Slide the histogram in, and that's all I need to do. I don't need to slide it any further because I can see there's very, very little happening. Go OK. And then Command I. Control I on a PC, which is Image, Adjustments, Invert. I need to load it as a selection, so I'll load it down here. This dotty circle. Back to my layers. Make a new layer. Option delete, I'll fill it with black. Now this image, I just need to check it. It's grayscale. So I want to change it to RGB. I won't flatten it, I want to keep the transparency. And that's just because I'm taking it onto a color image. I'm going to select all, cut it, paste it onto my other image. And there we go, so we've got it there. Command 0. And again, I can do all these things to play with it. So first of all, I'm going to do something called a clipping mask. So if I make a new layer and I go to gradient, just drag it across. So it's filled up, but you can see it's just above that image with the type. Now if I hold down the Option key or the Alt on the PC and I go between the two layers, you'll see the icon change. The moment it's a hand, when it goes between the layers, I get a little square with an arrow. If I click, it clips them together. So it means this top image is only going to show inside the bottom image. If I go back between them, holding the Option key down, so it has a cross through the arrow. It undoes it. So Option or Alt, click between, and it clips them. You can put more layers in and clip them as well, and clip them to each other. So in this case, I've got it clipped. It means that with this top image, I can now cycle through some of these options. And I can end up with some kind of, in some cases, some nice things going on. Difference. I'm going to go back up to this one, the one called Pin Light. Oh, Pin Light. I can change the opacity if I want. And what you'll see is it's going to black. The reason it's not having a huge amount of difference is because it's this color that's changing on top of the black. So now let's play with it. So I know I can go on here, Command, click on the mask, and I'm going to get all of this. So if I go next to the black layer, I can go Layer, Layer Mask, Reveal All. So I've got a nice white plain mask. If I get black, I can block out some of these areas inside the cloud. So for instance, this area here, I get rid of it and try and draw that in. Where else would I want to chop it out? I might chop out this bit of the S. Gonna knock off this stuff down here, leave the arrow, a little bit there that I'll knock out, and maybe I'll get rid of this chunk here and leave this little drip. So there's lots of areas that we can start to play with. Command Shift I has the background selected, everything outside of that, and again I can come in and say, okay, where do I want to get rid of it? What parts do I want to remove? And I can go through and modify some of these bits, get rid of that little bit hidden in behind. And try and tidy up a little bit. Here, I don't want this bobby bit, but I'll leave the little drip. Just modifying it the whole time. This bit I'll take out, but I'll leave the drips as they go over the selection. Now I'm going to get this this graffiti. I'm going to drag it down, and I'm going to duplicate it. I need to drag the layers back into order. I'm also going to duplicate this gradient, and I just need to go through and I just need to Option click that, And again, this one up here, Option clip it. Oh, actually. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the mask on that one, delete it. I'm going to go Command, click on that graffiti, and now when I click on the gradient, I'm going to mask it. Now I can just get rid of that layer. This time I'm going to go Command T, except I need to click on the mask, go Command T, I'm going to scale it, I'm going to rotate it, Command minus, I'll scale it a bit more. Hit return, Command 0. So now this one, because it doesn't have the black underneath it, like this clipping mask, means that now these options will have more effect. So I can go through and I can change these color modes, find something that I find a wee bit more interesting. Okay, and go for this bright one, hard mix. And remember, I can still do all these things where I can command click on the mask, come up here to the mask beside the gradient. We know that black blocks out. Command Shift I means it's working on these background areas, and I can take some of this stuff out. Doesn't matter if I go over the image because the selection is controlling that. So I'm finding it just a bit too intense in places. Come in here. And of course I can go Command Shift I, or actually I'll get a bit more off the top there. Command Shift I swaps the selection around, and I can get rid of some of this stuff where it comes through the image. So take it off the bottom there. And probably Command Shift I to inverse the selection and get rid of this up here. It's just too much, too heavy. Command D. So you're really starting to make the image fairly complex. If I double click on it, I'm going to get my layer options again. The image is underneath. You can see it coming through. The reason up the top it didn't really do all that much, it's a fairly flat color, so it's just kind of going to blink on and off. But the image underneath is more complex. So I can bring it through in the darker areas, or I can bring it through in the lighter areas. Pull it in a bit, option, split that, and I can go OK. The one that's probably having more effect is this darker area here. So if I double click on that layer, remember that the top one's not going to do much because it's just going to blink on and off because it's a flat color, it's black. But the image underneath will have a lot more effect. So I'll try that. Bring through the light areas. Actually, I'm going to go back to the dark. I like the way that it's keeping it, but it's just kind of breaking it through there a wee bit. Option, split. Okay, so we're starting to get some pretty complex work coming out.